We're joined by Jonathan Howcroft for the BPL Soccer Vidcast. How are you, Jonathan?
Very well, thank you, Charlie. Yourself?
Very well. I'm just I'm been rocked on my heels by the news in the news of the world, Jonathan, about Ryan Giggs, who I thought was a blue-eyed boy who you'd be happy to have over to take your daughter out on a date. But it transpires, if the news of the world can be believed, and I'm sure it can, that he's been having an 8-year affair with his brother's wife. News that comes hard on the heels that other reports, Jonathan, that he's been seeing Miss Wales, who is also a Big Brother contestant, all the while being married, of course. I mean, what's going on?
Well, I think you've just explained everything that I could possibly add. The benefit for Giggs in all this is that last year he was awarded the PFA Player of the Year by his peers in what was considered to be like a lifetime achievement award. So whether they knew something that we didn't at the time or what, I'm not sure. But his stock in the last year, 18 months, has been at an all-time high. It will be interesting to see how the Giggs brand is damaged by this. Obviously, you know, with what happened to Tiger Woods as an example, the higher your standards that you set yourself and you were perceived to be from the outset, the greater the risk of the fall. So Giggs is at that stage in his career where he'd be looking to go into coaching or media roles, and be interesting to see where he goes from here. Tiger
Woods is a good, I'm glad you mentioned him, because these are two sportsmen whose reputations are whiter than white, or they had been until these kind of slightly tawdry, sordid revelations had reached the tabloids in Britain. And Giggs, as I say, and you're a Man United supporter, is a guy who we thought could do no wrong.
Yeah, I think sports fans tend to put a bit too much emphasis on the private lives of sports people, and obviously, you know, it's not about condoning or vilifying their behaviour. I think it's just about that sense of being duped. I think in Giggs' case, compared to Tiger Woods, for example, he wasn't marketing his own range of clothing or sports drinks or whatever based on the "I'm whiter than white." But it's disappointing that the end of his career will be overshadowed by these particular stories.
So are you still going to call your firstborn Ryan?
I don't know. My firstborn would always have been called Eric if I was given free rein. The one thing about Giggs, there's a story about Giggs which I like. When he was a kid coming through, there were all sorts of stories about him partying. And Sir Alex Ferguson quite famously knew every doorman, bar staff, nightclub owner in Manchester. And he would just turn up out of the blue at these nightclubs and drag a teenage Giggs, you know, by the collar and take him out. Surely at some point he must have just stepped back and thought, you're all right, I can let you go on with your life now. You know, how wrong he was, you know.
All right, well look, we're going to focus on local football and the news that Harry Kewell might be coming back to Australia to play in the A-League, and he's been linked already with Melbourne Victory and Newcastle, and Nathan Tinkler's very deep pockets. But Victory apparently the first team, Jonathan, that have made overtures to him.
Yes, I think Victory's overtures are as much Kewell's agent doing his job properly. Yeah. I had stories following the Asian Cup that a number of senior Socceroos player agents were indicating that if the money was there, their players may be available for the A-League in the next 2 or 3 years. And as has been widely reported, Kewell has one of the best, most active agents in the game. What I think is good about this story is it indicates that the lifespan of a Socceroo doesn't necessarily have to be curtailed if they join the A-League. One would imagine that Kewell has spoken to Holger Osek and talked about this decision, and as you can see by the squads that Osek's been picking, there's no barrier to being an international if you play in the domestic competition. So I think at this stage of his career, the kind of next step that Kewell's looking for, I think that he could have a fantastic legacy if he chose any Australian club right now.
Yeah. He's from the west of Sydney, and there is talk always that that part of the country is going to get a licence, a franchise. I mean, that would be a fantastic place for him to end his career if that was at all possible.
I think that would be the ideal scenario. Unfortunately, the state of the bids from the second Sydney franchise haven't really been up to scratch. So it's unlikely that there will be a second team in Sydney anytime soon. But if Kewell's back in the country and the A-League hierarchy and the FFA have got their wits about them, this could be a perfect opportunity to lock in the poster boy for that new franchise if it gets off the ground. But
he doesn't come cheap. I mean, if the reports today are to be believed, he's been asking, or his manager been asking for $2.5 million, put that price tag on his head, as well as other inducements, cars and houses and so forth, and even a share of the gate takings. Now, Kewell's manager is not known to be a shrinking violet. I mean, he will be out there trying to screw the best deal he possibly can for his star client. That's a price tag not many clubs can afford.
It isn't, and I think realistically there's only Newcastle with Tinkler that could genuinely afford it on those terms. I think other clubs would have to look at ways around, and probably with the support of the league, have to look at ways around finding those funds if they were serious, and it would obviously require a lot of goodwill on Kewell's part as well.
And third party.
Significant third-party deals, without a shadow of a doubt. I think what this raises is how the A-League can compete with the various leagues internationally, because it is such a small competition here, and the pool of players isn't that significant. So when a guy like Kewell comes on the market and has shown at least some interest in coming, I think everything should be done that is possible to get him here. And it will be a real indication of where the competition sees itself and going forward, how it looks to compete with some of the bigger leagues around the world.
And imagine the publicity, as you say, in the middle of an NRL and AFL season for the A-League. It's just what they need, a bit of positive publicity.
It's superb, and as you saw when Melbourne Victory were linked to Roy Keane, and even Dwight York, just looking at Victory specifically, the way they've handled their search for a new coach has been outstanding in keeping their profile during the off-season, and any link to Kewell. I mean, you can imagine the conversations going on around the country now. Every club, every A-League club supporters must be dreaming that Kewell will sign for them.
Sure.
It's brilliant.
Socceroos beat New Zealand 3-0 in Adelaide a couple of days ago. A very jet-lagged New Zealand side that had just come from Mexico, I think, hadn't they, where they'd been beaten, is that right?
Yes. Well, they'd I think the game was actually in the US.
Okay,
where they played
Mexico. Okay. What did you take out of that particular match?
I took a lot out of it. I thought the selection was fantastic. Again, Osick not being afraid to give youth a chance. And in the next year, 2 years, you will see a gradual phasing out of the more established players, the Schwartzes, Kewell, Neil, Emerton, Cahill, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, their bodies just aren't going to be able to cope with a European domestic season and then their demands for Australia internationally. And the guys that came in looked good, and Osick has an obvious charm about him. And one of the great challenges with bringing young players into an established team is making them feel like they're good enough. And you look at the way some of the young players got on the ball, looked composed.
Who caught your eye? Who are we talking about?
I think Sporanovic has a future. I think Michael Zula has a future, and Tracy was probably the young star. His late penalty, will give him a lot of confidence. So I think the future is bright.
Fantastic. Jonathan Howcroft, thank you for your summary of the week in the Round Ball Code, and we look forward to catching up with you next week.
Thanks, Charlie.